Hello everyone, and Celtic Coach here. Welcome to another Friday chat. Now in the radio show today I was talking about the power of failure. Now a lot of the radio show that I do is on Fridays, and it's the Celtic Coach radio show, an Irish talk show just for men and all things manly. So it's a show for men, but we have a lot of ladies that listen in too. And the show today was all about the power of failure, so I thought I'd do a little video to kind of just encapsulate some of the things that we talked about on the show today. You know, as men, we're quite logical in our thinking, whereas women tend to be a lot more emotional in their thinking. And one of the things that's a challenge for most men with that is when we fail, when we don't complete something, when we don't take something and take it all the way to the end, or when we stop halfway in the middle of something, or we don't start something and say in some way we failed, or we hit a bump in the road in a project or whatever it might be, in our relationship, in our finances, in our careers, in some aspect or part of our lives. And it's at this point that we usually do two things. We usually decide to go, or we usually decide to grow. So we kind of have two choices that happen. We can go or we can grow. Now I remember when I went to LA for the very first time, a young man of 30, and went to LA, and I found out very soon that LA is one of those places that you either grow or you go. I was living up on top of a mountain. I was living in Colorado, and I had the life of Riley. You know, snowboarding every winter, ran a restaurant, lived up there all year round, had a great life, absolutely no stress. And when I went to LA, something very interesting happened. I experienced massive amounts of stress in a very short period of time. And I realized that I could either start on this road of self-development and start to develop myself to where I could really start to grow, or I could go. There was only two things that I could do: grow or go. Thank God I decided to grow. Now, a couple of years later, I became a coach, and I coach men on different topics, you know, how to create change in their life, how to get what they want in their life. So today, the show is all about the power of failure, getting what you want. Now, what's very interesting is that when we talk about failure, another way to think about failure is there's nothing failed. You have not failed. If you fall down and get up, you have not failed. Now, if you fall down and you stay down and you never get back up, you never get back on the horse after you've been kicked off, then I would consider that failure, because you've given up at some point. Whereas when we get back on the horse and we say, okay, let me try it again, that's feedback. So failure is really feedback in disguise. It's very, very interesting. You know, I train coaches to become coaches. And one of the things that they're very afraid to do is they're very afraid to make mistakes. And to me, mistakes are the portals of discovery. When we make mistakes, we can learn something. In Hollywood, for instance, when I was on the movie sets, a mistake or a mistake was, hey, we didn't get what we wanted on that one, let's do it again. Let's take another crack at it, take another shot. So they would have a mistake, and then they would do a retake to get whatever it is they wanted. So mistakes really are feedback. Failure is a form of feedback. But you see, we can look at it two ways. We can look at failure as something that's stopping me. In coaching, we call them little gremlins. You know, that little voice in your here on your shoulder that tells you, you're no good, you can't do it, you'll never do it, someone like you couldn't, blah, 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 blah. If we listen to those voices, then we're going to tap into failure, and we're going to stay there, we're going to live there, we're going to have our beingness there. Whereas if we start to look at failure as feedback, then we can start to ask ourselves some different questions. Now, let's take a look at this from a coaching point of view. From a coaching point of view, failure is feedback. And the ways that you can ask different questions around this are very simple. When something comes up, when you hit a wall and something comes up, you can say to yourself, okay, what's the feedback here? What am I learning from this? What can this possibly teach me? What's one way that I could do this differently? What can I learn from this so that I can use to grow as opposed to go? Right? What's one thing that I can learn from this, or what's one thing that I can use to begin to do things differently? How might I begin to do things differently? What's one thing that I already know that I can change here? What am I learning from this? What am I experiencing here that I can take with me and grow as opposed to go? Because we're either going or we're growing. And the key with failure, with getting what you want through failure, is that you use it to grow. You use it as a feedback loop. You use it as a feedback form. You've heard people say, you know, strike while the iron is hot. W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats, said, in order to make that iron hot, strike it. Don't wait for the iron to get hot, strike it. And what he's saying is that when you come up against something that's challenging, go through it. Now there's many ways you can do that, through questioning. It's very powerful. So how might I go around this problem? How might I go over this problem? How might I go through this problem? What's one thing that I could do to move this out of the way? What's one way that I could begin to move past this problem? What's one solution that I could see for this? How might I begin to move past this problem? What's one solution that I already know how to move past this problem? How can I use this as a way to learn, as a way to grow? As a way, how can I use this failure, this feedback, as a way to grow? Very important that we ask ourselves some questions, some open-ended questions. You know, in the field of coaching, they say that 80% of success is 80% psychology and 20% mechanics, which basically means that it's not what we do with our physical bodies. That's the mechanics, the skills, the actions, the environment that we do things in. But it's more about the psychology of, okay, how do I want to look at this? It's the old adage of looking at the glass, you know, is it half empty or is it half full? And I've had many experiences with my life. I've failed many. I've failed more times than I've had breakfast, let's just put it that way. I've failed quite a few times in my life. But one of the things that I started learning, and one of my earlier mentors really drummed this into me, was, Dermot, what are you learning? What are you learning from that? Are you using this feedback to beat yourself up over the head with the hammer? Or are you using this feedback to tap yourself on the shoulder and say, okay, all right, I gave it a good shot. What can I learn? And now I'm going to give it another shot. So that we don't beat ourselves over the head, which is, as men, what do we do most of the times when we're hit with a challenge? We beat ourselves over the head, don't we? We say, okay, this is enough of this. Oh, I'm an idiot. I can't do this. Why am I so stupid? Now, here's an interesting thing that I'd like you to consider. Asking yourself some different questions. So instead of saying, why did I do this? I'm so stupid. Because when we ask ourselves a stupid question, we get a stupid answer. When you ask yourself a good question, there's a good possibility you get a good answer. When you ask yourself a great question, there's a good possibility you're going to get a great answer. So the questions are the answers. Anytime we ask ourselves a great question, we're going to get an answer that's better than what we got before. Einstein said it best, the epitome of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Yet we do that in our lives. I have clients that I coach, and they come to me and they say, Dermot, I've done everything there possibly is. There's no solutions here. And the story, of course, is that there's no way out of this problem that they have, this perceived problem, right? And I say, well, you know, what are all these millions of things that you've done? And they say, oh, I've done this, I've done that, I've done blah, 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 blah. I said, okay, that's not a million. And did any of those things work? They say, no, none of those things worked. And then I say, well, What else have you done? Well, I've done a dozen other things. I said, well, name them. What are they? And they say, well, I've done a few. I've done a few, Dermot. I said, okay, well, tell me what the few are. And of course, they inevitably tell me the things that they've done, and then right at the end, they'll say, now, that didn't work. And I say, so what you're telling me is, John, that you're telling me all the things that haven't worked. And they say, yes, correct. I said, well, just suppose you could think of some new things. Just suppose that a new solution was possible. What might it be? Just imagine for a moment that you could come up with something completely different, completely out of the box. That you could look at this failure in a different way. How might you look at it differently? In what way could you look at it differently? How could you go around it? How could you go over it? How could you go through it? Who do you know that has had this problem and that could give you some advice? Who do you know that has moved through a problem similar to this that you could sit down and talk to? You see, here's the interesting thing about failure, everyone, and getting what you want. When I ask my clients, why do you think you failed? Well, why did this fail? All right? So a great question is, instead of saying, how did I make this happen? You can say, how did this happen? It's a great question to ask. But I inevitably say to them, so how did this happen, John? And they tell me things like, they had, it was a lack of resources, it was a lack of time, it was a lack of leadership, it was a lack of leads if they're, working on sales and marketing, it was a lack of contacts, it was a lack of skills. And a lot of times it is a lack of skills. That's very true. But more than that, it's not resources that are the problem. It's not resources that are the problem why you failed. I use that loosely. I'm really saying why you didn't look at it as feedback. Is because you decided to go then grow. You decided to look at what wasn't working. You decided to look at the negative. You started to look at the things that weren't working in that, as opposed to looking at or being. So here's another way of saying it. It's not a lack of resources. It's a lack of resourcefulness. Now you might think, what the hell, Dermot, does that mean? Lack of resourcefulness. Well, one of the tenets of coaching that I have is that the client has all the resources to be a success. Now that doesn't mean that they might have the answers to that in that moment, but they have the resources within them to get on the internet or call a friend or whatever it might be to find out what could be a possible solution to that problem. So the key in what I'm saying today, and we're going to wrap up now, the key in what I'm saying is, if you want a different answer, ask a different question. If you want a greater answer, ask a different question, ask a greater question. So what can I learn from this? That's a great question to ask yourself in terms of when you have a problem around trying to solve something. How can I look at this differently? How can I perceive this differently? What can I do differently? Who can I be differently in order to see this differently? Who do I need to be in order to see this differently? What do I need to become? You've heard the old adage of it's not what you get in life, but it's who you become. Challenges are the same way. It's not what you get from a challenge, but it's who you become by going through it. That's the key to life. Because what's going to make you happy, everyone, is not stopping at a problem. What's going to make you happy is solving a problem and moving forward, creating progress. Progress is what makes us happy. Getting results is what makes us happy. And the word progress, it means to move forward. So as long as we're moving forward a little bit, so if you could take one of these challenges that you have and just ask yourself some of these questions that I shared in the video today, it will really help you to start to move forward. Now, if you're stuck and you hit a challenge, you hit a wall, and you're like, oh, I can't do anything here, then do a little question that I do with clients all the time. They say to me, Dermot, I don't know what to do. And I say to them, just suppose, John, just play with me here for a moment. But just suppose you did know. What is it you would know? And invariably, the client always shares something with me through that question. I don't know what I want. Just suppose you did know what you want. Just suppose you could take a little snapshot with a camera and have a little peek of one thing that you want, one thing that may be important. Just suppose that you could wave a magic wand, you've heard that one before, and make things different. What part of your life would you choose to make differently? How would you make this problem different? How would you learn from this problem? What would you learn from this problem? So questions are the answers, everyone. We're talking about failure. So are we doomed for failure, or do you want to be destined for success? And the key in that is the questions that we ask. You ask a better question, you get a better answer. Einstein said, you know, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes of that hour on the question. And questions are the answers. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our little Friday video, and I certainly enjoy doing them. There's plenty of videos there. Have fun with them. This has been the Celtic Coach, and I wish you all the best success, and cheers. Take care. We'll see you soon.